This year, my parents forgot my birthday for the 5th time in a row, but when my sister's birthday rolled around, they gave her a brand new car. That was the breaking point for me. I decided to cut them off completely, but I never expected their reaction to be so outrageous, or for the truth I uncovered to flip my world upside down. It all started a few weeks ago, on my 23rd birthday. To be honest, I wasn't expecting much. For the last 4 years, my parents had completely forgotten my birthday, so I wasn't exactly holding my breath for a celebration. Still, some stubborn part of me hoped this year would be different. Maybe they'd surprise me with a call, or even a simple happy birthday text. It wasn't about gifts, it was about being remembered. The day passed like any other. I went to work, tried to focus on my tasks, and resisted the urge to check my phone every 5 minutes. Around lunchtime, a couple of my coworkers surprised me with a cupcake and a candle, which was sweet and honestly the highlight of my day. When I got home that evening, I kept my phone within reach, waiting for a buzz or a ping. But by the time I crawled into bed, the only notifications on my phone were from apps trying to sell me birthday discounts. As I stared at the dark ceiling, I told myself not to be surprised. After all, this wasn't new. My parents had always been more focused on my younger sister, Emma. Still, as much as I tried to shrug it off, it stung. 5 years in a row. 5 times they'd let my birthday slip by like it didn't matter, like I didn't matter. 2 weeks later, Emma's birthday rolled around. The difference was night and day. My parents went all out, throwing her a huge party at a fancy restaurant downtown. The guest list was massive: family, friends, even a few of Emma's coworkers. My mom made a big deal about how special this milestone was for her. I wasn't planning to go, but Emma called me herself, asking if I'd come. She sounded so excited, and I didn't want to let her down. So I put on a nice shirt and showed up, telling myself it wasn't her fault that our parents played favorites. The party was beautiful. Twinkling lights, an enormous cake, a live band. But the real kicker came toward the end, when my dad stood up to give a speech. He talked about how proud they were of Emma, how much they loved her, and how they wanted to show their appreciation for everything she'd accomplished. Then he pulled out a set of keys and handed them to her. A car? Emma gasped, her eyes wide with delight. A brand new car, my mom said, beaming. You deserve it, sweetheart. I sat there, frozen, watching as everyone applauded and cheered. Emma ran up to hug them, tears streaming down her face as she thanked them over and over. And me? I felt invisible. Like I didn't exist in the same universe as this family. My parents couldn't even remember my birthday, but they could drop thousands of dollars on a car for Emma? I excused myself early, mumbling something about work the next morning. On the drive home, I kept replaying the moment in my head, wondering why I'd even bothered to show up. That night, I made a decision. Enough was enough. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine, couldn't keep bending over backward to be part of a family that clearly didn't value me. I didn't know exactly what cutting them off would look like yet, but one thing was clear. Something had to change. Growing up, it didn't take long for me to realize that Emma was the favorite child. My parents didn't try to hide it. She was their baby, their miracle, the one they thought they'd never have. You see, my mom had trouble conceiving after I was born, and when Emma came along 8 years later, it was like all their prayers had been answered. At first, I didn't mind. I loved Emma to pieces. As her big brother, I wanted to see her happy, and it felt natural to help out and let her have the spotlight. When we were kids, I'd let her tag along with my friends, give her the bigger slice of cake, or let her have the best seat in the car. But as we got older, it became impossible to ignore the way my parents treated her like she was the center of their universe. Emma got everything handed to her on a silver platter: dance lessons, designer clothes, private tutors, the latest gadgets. Meanwhile, I had to scrape by on hand-me-downs and figure things out on my own. My parents had this habit of brushing off my needs with phrases like, "You're older, you can handle it," or "You don't need that." It was like my independence made me less deserving of their attention. One memory that sticks out was when I was in high school and needed a laptop for my classes. I saved up for months, working every spare hour I could find at a part-time job. I was so proud of myself when I finally had enough to buy a second-hand laptop. A few weeks later, it was Christmas, and Emma unwrapped a brand new MacBook. The jealousy I felt in that moment made me feel horrible. I hated that I was envious of my little sister. But it wasn't just about the laptop, it was about the message behind it. My parents didn't even blink when I had to work for something, but when it came to Emma, they bent over backward to make sure she had the best. It wasn't just material things either. My achievements were always met with a polite nod or a quick, good job, buddy, before the conversation shifted back to Emma. But when Emma came home with a participation ribbon from a school art show, my parents acted like she'd won an Oscar. My mom even framed the ribbon and hung it in the hallway. I tried to brush it off, telling myself that favoritism was normal in families, especially with the youngest child. My friends would say, "Don't take it personally. Parents always spoil the baby of the family." For a while, I believed them. I convinced myself that it wasn't a big deal, that I should just be happy for Emma and focus on my own life. But after the car incident on her birthday, it became impossible to ignore. Watching my parents hand her the keys to a brand new car after forgetting my birthday for the 5th year in a row, that wasn't normal favoritism. That was a clear message. Emma mattered more. I started replaying moments from our childhood, all the little instances where they'd chosen her over me. Like the time I had a big soccer game and begged them to come watch, but they skipped it to take Emma to a dance recital. Or the time I got sick and needed to stay home from school, but my mom left me alone all day so she could volunteer at Emma's field trip. At the time, I told myself it was fine. After all, she was younger and needed more attention. But now I could see it for what it was, a pattern. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. It wasn't Emma's fault, not really. She didn't ask to be treated like the golden child. But my parents? They made a choice, time and time again, to prioritize her needs, her happiness, and her success over mine. And it wasn't just about being overlooked, it was about how it shaped me. I grew up feeling like I had to prove my worth, to work twice as hard just to get a fraction of the recognition Emma received for existing. After Emma's birthday party, I realized I couldn't keep pretending it didn't bother me. This wasn't just about a car or a forgotten birthday. This was years of being made to feel like I didn't matter, like I was an afterthought in my own family. That's when it hit me. I deserved better. I didn't have to keep putting up with it. For the first time, I started to think about what it would mean to step away, not from Emma, but from my parents. To take a stand and demand the respect I deserved, even if it meant walking away entirely. After Emma's party, the resentment bubbled inside me like a boiling pot that had finally reached its limit. I couldn't stop replaying the scene in my head, my parents beaming with pride as they handed her the car keys, the whole room applauding, Emma crying tears of joy. And there I was, sitting at the corner of the table like a footnote in someone else's story. I kept asking myself why I even bothered going. I told myself it was for Emma, but the truth was some small, desperate part of me hoped that maybe, just maybe, my parents would surprise me. That they'd take me aside and say, "We know we forgot your birthday, and we're sorry." Instead, they acted like I didn't exist, barely throwing a thanks for coming my way before turning their full attention back to Emma. The bitterness consumed me for days. Every time I thought I'd let it go, another memory from that night would resurface, reigniting the anger. Then came the moment that pushed me over the edge. It was a few days after the party, when my mom called. At first, I thought maybe, just maybe, she was calling to check in, to acknowledge how distant I'd been since the party. But of course, that wasn't it. "Hi, sweetie," she said, her tone overly cheerful. "I was wondering if you could help us out with something." "Sure," I said cautiously, though I could already sense where this was going. "Well, with Emma's car, things are a little tight financially right now. Would you mind pitching in for her insurance for a few months? Just until we get back on our feet." I froze. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. "You're asking me to pay for Emma's car insurance?" "Yes," she said matter-of-factly. "It's just temporary. You're in a good place financially, and it would really help us out." I almost laughed out loud. "I can't believe you're asking me this," I said, my voice shaking with barely contained anger. Mom sighed like I was the one being unreasonable. "What's the big deal? You know we're stretched thin right now." And that was it. That was the moment I snapped. "The big deal," I said, my voice rising, "is that you forgot my birthday for the 5th year in a row. But you had no problem throwing Emma a massive party and buying her a car. And now you're asking me to help pay for it." "Sweetie, it's not like that," Mom said, but I cut her off. "No, it is like that," I shot back. "This isn't just about the party or the car. It's about the fact that you've spent my entire life making it clear that Emma matters more to you than I ever will. Do you have any idea how that feels?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Mom finally spoke, her tone was sharp. "You're being dramatic. We've always done our best for both of you." "Really?" I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Because it sure doesn't feel that way. When was the last time you even remembered my birthdays?" Mom didn't answer. The silence was deafening, and I realized she had no response because she didn't have an excuse. The truth was right there, plain as day. "I'm not going to pay for Emma's car insurance," I said firmly. "And I'm done pretending that everything is fine between us." "Don't be like this," Mom said, her voice softening in an attempt to guilt me. "You're making a big deal out of nothing. Family is family, you can't just walk away from that." "Watch me," I said before hanging up. After that call, something in me shifted. For years, I'd buried my feelings, convincing myself that I could tolerate being second best. But this was the last straw. I couldn't keep playing the role of the dutiful son while my parents treated me like an afterthought. I spent the rest of the night pacing my apartment, replaying the conversation in my head. Part of me felt guilty. Cutting off your family isn't a decision you make lightly, but the overwhelming feeling was relief. For the first time in my life, I was putting myself first. I didn't know what cutting them off would look like or how my parents would react, but one thing was clear. I was done being invisible. It was time to take control of my own happiness, even if it meant walking away from the people who were supposed to care about me the most. After the call with my mom, I decided I wasn't going to let things slide. For years, I'd bottled up my feelings, letting my parents' favoritism toward Emma eat away at me. But now it was out in the open, and I wasn't going to let them sweep it under the rug like they always did. I sent a text to our family group chat. "We need to talk." Short, to the point, and impossible to ignore. To my surprise, they agreed to meet that weekend at my parents' house. I knew it wasn't going to be an easy conversation, but I was determined to finally stand up for myself. When I arrived, the tension in the room was palpable. My mom sat stiffly on the couch, her arms crossed, while my dad stared at the floor like he'd rather be anywhere else. Emma was there too, perched in an armchair with a confused and slightly offended look on her face, as if she couldn't understand why I was upset in the first place. I didn't waste any time getting to the point. "I'm here because I can't keep doing this," I said, my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. "You've been treating me like an afterthought for years, and I'm done pretending it doesn't bother me." My mom immediately went on the defensive. "Oh, for heaven's sake. Are we really going to rehash this again? We've always done our best for you." "Your best," I repeated, my voice rising. "You forgot my birthday 5 years in a row, Mom." 5. "Meanwhile, you threw Emma a massive party and bought her a car. How is that your best?" My dad chimed in, his tone exasperated. "Why do you have to make everything about yourself? Emma's car wasn't about you, it was about her. You're acting like we've done something wrong just because we wanted to celebrate her. That's not the point, and you know it," I said, my frustration boiling over. "This isn't just about the car. It's about years of being treated like I don't matter. Every time Emma needed something, you bent over backward to give it to her. But when I needed help, I was told to figure it out on my own." Emma, who had been quiet up until this point, finally spoke up. "I didn't ask for any of this," she said, her voice trembling with that signature wounded tone she used whenever she felt attacked. "You're making it sound like it's my fault." "It's not your fault," I said, trying to stay calm. "But you've benefited from it and you know it. You've always been the favorite, Emma, and I'm just supposed to accept that? Well, I won't anymore." My mom rolled her eyes. "You're being ridiculous. Of course we love you. But you're older, more independent. You don't need as much from us as Emma does." "Stop making excuses," I snapped. "This isn't about me needing more. It's about basic respect. It's about treating me like I'm part of this family, not an outsider you only acknowledge when it's convenient." My dad sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. "Look, if you want an apology, fine. We're sorry if you feel like we've been unfair. But life isn't always equal, and you need to grow up and accept that." That was the moment I realized they weren't going to change. No matter how much I laid out the facts, no matter how clear I made it that their behavior hurt me, they were always going to justify it. I stood up, my heart pounding. "If you don't start treating me like a part of this family," I said, my voice shaking with emotion, "then I'm done. I'm not going to keep bending over backward for people who don't care about me." My mom scoffed, throwing up her hands. "Don't be so dramatic. You're just jealous of Emma. It's not our fault you're not as close to us as she is." Her words hit me like a slap in the face. All these years, I'd thought maybe they didn't realize what they were doing. Maybe they just needed me to spell it out for them. But this wasn't ignorance. This was intentional. Their response sealed the deal. I walked out of that house and didn't look back. When I got home, I started packing my things. I wasn't going to waste any more time trying to make them see my side. Emma texted me later that night, begging me not to overreact. She said things like, "You know they love you in their own way, and you're only hurting yourself by cutting them off." I didn't reply. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to let guilt or manipulation dictate my choices. I deserved better than this, and if they couldn't see that, then I didn't need them in my life. As I packed the last of my things, I felt an unexpected sense of relief. For years, I'd been carrying the weight of their indifference, trying to prove I was worthy of their love. But now I was finally free. For the first time in my life, I did something I never thought I'd have the strength to do. I cut off contact with my parents. No calls, no texts, no obligatory holiday visits. At first, it felt incredible, like I had finally taken control of my life. The constant weight of their favoritism and dismissiveness lifted, and for the first time, I could breathe without worrying about how to earn their approval. The first few days were almost euphoric. I didn't have to brace myself for passive-aggressive comments or pretend I was okay when they showered Emma with attention and left me in the shadows. I started pouring my energy into my own life, reconnecting with friends, focusing on work, and even picking up a new hobby, something I hadn't done in years because I was too consumed with family drama. But as the initial rush faded, the silence began to creep in. No matter how much I tried to distract myself, I couldn't ignore the nagging question at the back of my mind. Did they even notice I was gone? Emma was the first to reach out, of course. My little sister had always been the mediator, even though she was often the source of the conflict. A few days after I walked out, she sent me a text. "Hey, I know things got heated, but we're family. You should really talk to Mom and Dad. They're upset, and I hate seeing them like this." I stared at the message for a long time before putting my phone down. Emma had a knack for making everything about her emotions, even when it had nothing to do with her. Did she hate seeing them upset, or did she just hate the disruption to her perfect little world? When I didn't reply, she sent another text the next day. "Family is forever, you know. I get that you're hurt, but this isn't the way to handle it. You're only making things harder for yourself." Harder for myself? The irony made me laugh. Cutting them off had been the easiest thing I'd ever done. Staying in that toxic cycle of neglect and favoritism was what had been hard. I still didn't reply. The silence from my parents, on the other hand, was deafening. At first, I thought maybe they needed time to cool off before reaching out. But as days turned into weeks, I started to wonder if they even cared. I checked my phone obsessively during those first few weeks, half expecting to see a missed call or a heartfelt text. But there was nothing. Not even a half-hearted "how are you?" or "let's talk." Part of me felt validated. After all, their silence only confirmed what I'd suspected all along. I didn't matter to them. But another part of me couldn't shake the hurt. I'd walked away from my own family, and they hadn't even tried to stop me. It was a bitter pill to swallow. No matter how much I told myself I was better off without them, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness every time I thought about the family dinners I used to sit through, wishing for the tiniest scrap of attention. One night, Emma called me. I let it go to voicemail, but when I saw the notification pop up, curiosity got the better of me. Her voice was trembling as she said, "Hey, I don't know why you're being so stubborn, but this is getting ridiculous. Mom's been crying every night, and Dad's not sleeping well. They miss you, and you're punishing them for no reason. You're punishing me too. Can't we just move past this?" I felt my chest tighten as I listened to her words. It was the same guilt trip I'd heard 100 times before, packaged in a new bow. But this time, it didn't work. I hit delete without responding. As the weeks turned into months, the silence became a strange kind of comfort. I no longer felt the need to explain myself or justify my decisions. I realized that for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for their approval. But the quiet also gave me space to reflect. I thought about all the times I'd bent over backward to please them, hoping they'd finally see me, only to be met with indifference. I thought about how many birthdays, holidays, and milestones I'd spent quietly wishing for a family that cared as much about me as they did about Emma. And then I thought about what I wanted moving forward. For so long, my identity had been tied to my role in the family, the overlooked sibling, the forgotten son. But now, I had the chance to redefine who I was, without their expectations weighing me down. One evening, as I was scrolling through old photos on my phone, I came across a picture of my family from a few years ago. It was taken at Emma's high school graduation. My parents were standing proudly on either side of her, smiling ear to ear. I was off to the side, half out of the frame, holding her purse because she didn't want it in the picture. Looking at that photo, something inside me clicked. I wasn't angry anymore, not at Emma, not even at my parents. What I felt instead was sadness. They'd chosen to invest all their love and energy into one child, leaving the other to fend for himself. And in doing so, they'd lost more than they realized. That night, I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't let their choices define me anymore. If they wanted to stay silent, that was their decision. I wasn't going to spend my life waiting for them to change. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The silence wasn't just theirs anymore, it was mine too. And in that silence, I found the strength to move forward. It had been 2 months since I'd cut off my parents, and I was finally starting to settle into my new normal. The silence from them had been both a relief and a reminder of why I'd made the decision in the first place. So when my doorbell rang one Saturday afternoon and I saw my dad standing on the other side, I was completely caught off guard. He looked uncomfortable, like he wasn't sure if he should be there. He had his hands shoved into his pockets, his shoulders hunched slightly. For a moment, I just stared at him through the peephole, debating whether to open the door. Finally, curiosity got the better of me. I unlocked the door and opened it halfway, leaning against the frame. "What are you doing here?" He shifted on his feet, glancing down the hallway before meeting my eyes.
"We need to talk," he said.
His voice wasn't sharp or demanding like I was used to. It was softer, almost hesitant. I let him in, but I didn't offer him a seat or a drink. This wasn't a social visit, and I wanted to keep things as formal as possible. He stood awkwardly in the middle of my small living room, glancing around like he was searching for a way to start the conversation. "I'm sorry for forgetting your birthday," he finally said, his voice low. "We didn't realize how much it hurt you." I crossed my arms, raising an eyebrow. "You forgot it 5 years in a row. Don't tell me you didn't realize it hurt." He winced, running a hand through his graying hair. "You're right. We messed up. But you have to understand, things have been hard for us lately. We've had a lot on our plate." His words hung in the air, but they didn't land the way I think he expected them to. I wanted to believe him, I really did, but everything about his tone and body language felt off. It wasn't the heartfelt apology I'd hoped for. It was calculated, careful, like he was saying what he thought I wanted to hear. I sighed, gesturing for him to sit down. "Okay, let's hear it. What's been so hard for you?" He hesitated for a moment before lowering himself onto the edge of my couch. "Emma's tuition has been a lot more expensive than we expected," he admitted. "And the car, well, we stretched ourselves thin to make that happen. We didn't mean to prioritize her over you. It just kind of happened." "Kind of happened?" I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. "Dad, you didn't just forget my birthday. You've spent years making me feel like an afterthought. And now you're telling me it was all because of money." "It's not just about money," he said quickly. Look, your mom and I have always felt like you didn't need as much from us. You're independent, capable. Emma, she's different. She's always needed more support." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. On some level, I understood where he was coming from, but it didn't make it hurt any less. So, because I didn't demand as much attention, I got ignored? Do you realize how backwards that is? He looked genuinely uncomfortable now, fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. "I'm not saying we were right," he said, "but we're trying to make things right now. That's why I'm here." His words should have been reassuring, but they felt hollow. If he and Mom were really trying to make things right, why had it taken them 2 months to reach out? And why hadn't Mom come with him? "What about Mom?" I asked, leaning forward slightly. "Why isn't she here?" "She thought it would be better if I came alone," he said, avoiding my gaze. I shook my head, laughing bitterly. "Unbelievable. She can't even face me. But you expect me to believe that you're both trying to fix things?" Dad didn't have an answer for that. He just sat there, staring at the floor, his discomfort palpable. For a moment, I felt a pang of pity for him. He looked so small, so unsure of himself, so unlike the man I'd grown up with. But then I remembered why we were here, and the anger came rushing back. "This isn't about making amends," I said finally, my voice steady. "This is about getting me back in line. You don't actually care about fixing the relationship. You just want to smooth things over, so I'll go back to playing the role of the good, quiet son." "That's not true," he said, but the lack of conviction in his voice told me otherwise. I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. "I'm not going to let you guilt me into coming back, Dad. If you and Mom really want to fix this, you'll have to do a hell of a lot more than showing up unannounced and offering half-baked apologies." He looked like he wanted to argue, but instead, he just nodded and stood. "We'll figure it out," he said quietly. "I hope you'll give us another chance." After he left, I sat on the couch for a long time, replaying the conversation in my head. Part of me wanted to believe that he was sincere, that this was the first step toward real change. But another part of me couldn't shake the feeling that it was all just damage control. The apology wasn't enough. It couldn't erase years of neglect or make up for the hurt they'd caused. If they wanted another chance, they have to prove they were willing to put in the work. Until then, I wasn't going to let myself get pulled back into their cycle of manipulation and guilt. For the first time in years, I was living life on my terms, and I wasn't about to give that up. After my dad left, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. His apology had felt rushed, hollow, and insincere, like he was trying to patch up a leaky roof without addressing the cracks in the foundation. But it wasn't just that, it was the timing. Why now? Why, after years of ignoring me, were they suddenly so interested in making things right? The question kept gnawing at me, and the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. I'd cut them off completely for 2 months, and they hadn't said a word during that time. Then, out of the blue, my dad showed up on my doorstep with a half-hearted apology. It didn't feel like the beginning of reconciliation. It felt like damage control. That night, I decided to dig deeper. Maybe I was overthinking it, but I needed answers. I pulled out an old box of family photos and documents that I'd shoved into the back of my closet when I moved out. It was mostly clutter. Holiday cards, school report cards, a few random receipts, but as I sorted through it, something caught my eye, a folded bank statement with my parents' names on it. The statement was dated from the previous year and listed a large payment labeled Emma's tuition. At first, I didn't think much of it, until I remembered Emma had told me she was on a full-ride scholarship. I stared at the statement, my mind racing. Why would my parents be paying for Emma's tuition if she had a scholarship? Had she lied about it? Or was there something else going on that I didn't know about? The more I thought about it, the more suspicious it seemed. My parents had always been tight-lipped about money, especially when it came to Emma. Anytime I asked questions about their finances growing up, they'd brush me off with vague answers like, "Don't worry about it," or, "We've got it under control." I couldn't let it go. I grabbed my phone and texted Emma, "We need to talk." She called me almost immediately, her voice cautious. "Hey, what's up?" "I found something interesting while going through some old stuff," I said, skipping the small talk. "A bank statement with a payment for your tuition." Care to explain? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Emma finally spoke, her voice was defensive. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me, Emma," I said, my patience already wearing thin. "You told me you had a scholarship. If that's true, then why are Mom and Dad making payments for your tuition?" She sighed, and I could practically hear her scrambling to come up with an explanation. "It's not what you think. The scholarship only covered part of my expenses, so Mom and Dad helped out with the rest. It's no big deal." "No big deals?" I repeated, incredulous. They've been complaining about money for years, telling me they couldn't afford to help me with anything. But they had no problem covering your tuition? Why didn't they just tell me the truth? Emma hesitated again, and I could tell she was holding something back. "Because they didn't want you to feel bad," she said finally. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Feel bad?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Do you have any idea how much worse it feels to find out they lied to me? That they've been bending over backward to give you everything while I got nothing?" "It's not like that," she said quickly. "You've always been independent. You didn't need the extra help." "That's not the point, Emma," I snapped. "It's not about what I needed. It's about fairness. It's about respect. They've spent my entire life making me feel like I wasn't good enough, like I didn't matter as much as you. And now this? It just proves everything I've ever felt about them." Emma's tone shifted, becoming more defensive. "You're overreacting. Mom and Dad love both of us. They just handled things differently with you." "Differently?" I said, laughing bitterly. "Is that what you call it? They forgot my birthday for 5 years, Emma. They bought you a car while I had to scrape together money for a used laptop. They've lied to me about their finances, and now you're telling me I'm overreacting?" She didn't respond right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer. "I didn't ask for any of this, you know. It's not my fault they treated us differently." Her words caught me off guard. For all my anger at my parents, I hadn't stopped to think about how Emma might feel in all of this. She hadn't chosen to be the golden child. She'd just played the role they'd given her. "I know it's not your fault," I said after a long pause. "But that doesn't make it hurt any less." Emma sighed. "I don't know what to tell you. Mom and Dad were just trying to do what they thought was best." "Yeah," I said bitterly. "For you?" We ended the call on an uneasy note. Emma didn't have the answers I was looking for, and I wasn't sure if she even understood why I was so upset. But one thing was clear. My parents had been lying to me for years, and I was done giving them the benefit of the doubt. That night, I stared at the bank statement again, the anger simmering just beneath the surface. This wasn't just about money, it was about trust. My parents had always justified their actions with excuses about what they could or couldn't afford, but now I knew the truth. They'd prioritized Emma's happiness and success over mine, and they hadn't even bothered to hide it. For the first time, I realized there was no going back. Whatever relationship I'd had with them was gone. And for the first time, I was okay with that. Emma called me back the next evening. Her voice was different. Hesitant, almost nervous. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began, and for a second, I thought she was about to apologize. Instead, she dropped a bombshell that changed everything. "You were right," she admitted, her voice trembling. "The scholarship, it wasn't real. Mom and Dad made it up because they didn't want anyone to know they'd taken out loans to pay for my tuition." I froze, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white.
"Wait.
"Are you saying they're in debt because of you?" "It's not like I asked them to do it," she said quickly, her tone defensive. They wanted me to have the best. They didn't want me to feel like I was missing out on anything." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implications. My parents had spent years crying poor, telling me they couldn't afford to help me with school, rent, or anything else I needed. And all that time, they were secretly funneling money into Emma's future, going so far as to bury themselves in debt to make it happen. I couldn't keep the anger out of my voice. "Do you have any idea what that looks like from my perspective, Emma? I've spent my entire life being told to figure things out on my own, while Mom and Dad bent over backward to give you everything. And now they're drowning in debt because of it? How is that fair?" Emma sighed, and I could hear the guilt creeping into her voice. "I didn't know they were struggling this much. They never told me about the loans. They just said they'd take care of it. And you didn't question that?" I asked, incredulous. "You didn't think to ask how they were paying for your tuition or the car, or any of the other things they've handed you?" "I didn't ask for the car," she shot back, her voice breaking. "I didn't ask for any of this. They made those choices, not me." Her words gave me pause. As much as I wanted to stay angry, I couldn't ignore the truth in what she was saying. Emma hadn't forced our parents to take out loans or prioritize her needs over mine. She was as much a product of their decisions as I was. Still, the bitterness was hard to shake. "Do you even understand what it's like to be on the other side of this?" I asked, my voice quieter now. "To watch them sacrifice everything for you while I got the scraps? It's not just about the money, Emma. It's about the message it sends." Emma didn't respond right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, almost pleading. "I get it, okay? I do. But I didn't ask to be the favorite. I didn't ask them to put me on a pedestal while they ignored you. I didn't realize how bad it was until now." Her admission hit me harder than I expected. For years, I'd carried this image of Emma as the golden child who reveled in the attention our parents gave her, but maybe I'd been wrong. Maybe she hadn't been fully aware of the dynamic, or at least not the extent of it. "What do you want me to do?" Emma asked after a long silence. "I can't change what happened. I can't undo the choices they made." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I don't know," I admitted. "I'm not asking you to fix it. I needed to know the truth." "Well, now you do," she said quietly. "And for what it's worth, I'm sorry. I really am." Her apology didn't erase the years of hurt, but it felt genuine. It was more than I'd ever gotten from our parents, and that counted for something. After we hung up, I sat in silence, staring at the bank statement on my coffee table. The anger I'd felt earlier was still there, but it was mixed with something else, sadness, maybe even pity. My parents had made their choices, and now they were paying the price for them. But in doing so, they'd fractured our family in ways that couldn't be repaired. I couldn't stop thinking about what Emma had said. They just wanted to make sure I had every opportunity. It wasn't her fault, but it didn't change the fact that their sacrifices for her had come at my expense. They'd chosen to prioritize her future over mine, and that was a choice I couldn't forgive. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let their actions define me anymore. I wasn't going to waste any more time trying to understand or justify their choices. They'd made their bed, and now they had to lie in it. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of clarity. The truth might have been painful, but it also set me free. I didn't need their approval, their apologies, or their explanations. All I needed was to focus on myself and my own happiness. And that was exactly what I planned to do. After my conversation with Emma, I couldn't stop thinking about everything I'd learned. The scholarship lie, the loans, the years of favoritism, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle finally falling into place. But instead of clarity, I felt an overwhelming sense of anger and sadness. My parents' choices hadn't just hurt me emotionally, they created a chasm between us that now felt impossible to bridge. For days, I debated whether to confront them. Part of me wondered if it was even worth it. They'd spent years justifying their actions, brushing off my feelings, and pretending everything was fine. What made me think they'd take accountability now? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't move forward without one final conversation. So I called them. My mom answered on the second ring, her voice cautious. "Hi, sweetie," she said, as if nothing had happened. "We need to talk," I said firmly. "In person?" There was a long pause before she responded. "Of course. When?"
"Tomorrow," I said.
"I'll come over." The next evening, I walked into the house I used to call home. It felt smaller than I remembered, like the walls had closed in over the years. My parents were waiting for me in the living room, sitting side by side on the couch. My dad looked tired, his face lined with stress, while my mom wore the same overly bright smile she always used to diffuse tension. I didn't waste any time. I sat down across from them, my back straight, and pulled out the bank statement I'd found. "What's this?" my dad asked, frowning as I handed it to him. "It's a bank statement showing a payment for Emma's tuition," I said. "You've been telling me for years that you couldn't afford to help me with anything, but you've been paying for her education. Why didn't you just tell me the truth?" My mom's smile faltered. She looked at my dad, then back at me, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "We didn't want to hurt you," she said softly. "Well, congratulations," I said bitterly. "You managed to do that anyway." My dad let out a heavy sigh, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "It's not as simple as you're making it sound," he said. "We just wanted to make sure Emma had the best chance in life. College is so expensive, and we didn't want her to struggle." "And what about me?" I asked, my voice rising. Did I not deserve the same? I had to scrape together every penny to pay for community college while working part-time, just to stay afloat. Meanwhile, you've been taking out loans for Emma and lying to me about it. Do you have any idea how that feels? My mom's eyes filled with tears. "We didn't mean to hurt you," she said, her voice trembling. "We love you. We've always loved you. But Emma, she needed more from us." "Needed more?" I repeated, shaking my head. "That's not an excuse. I understand that she's younger, but you've spent my entire life prioritizing her at my expense. You forgot my birthday for 5 years in a row, but you threw her lavish parties. You told me to figure it out when I needed help, but you bent over backward to make sure she had everything she wanted. How is that love?" My mom started crying then, her shoulders shaking as she buried her face in her hands. My dad put a hand on her back, his expression tight. "We know we made mistakes," he said quietly. "But we were doing the best we could. We didn't want you to feel neglected." "Then why did you lie to me?" I interrupted. "Why didn't you just tell me the truth about the loans, about everything? Instead, you let me believe I wasn't good enough. Do you even realize how much that messed me up?" Neither of them had an answer for that. The room fell into an awkward silence, broken only by my mom's quiet sobs. "I'm not here to make you feel guilty," I said after a long pause. "I'm here because I needed to say this. I needed you to know how much you've hurt me, and I needed to know if you even cared." My dad looked up at me, his eyes filled with regret. "Of course we care," he said. "We care about you more than you know. We thought you'd understand." "Well, I don't," I said bluntly. "And I don't know if I ever will." I stood up, my chest tight. "I don't know where we go from here. Maybe you really thought you were doing the right thing. But until you can take responsibility for how your choices affected me, I can't keep pretending everything's okay." My mom reached out as if to stop me, but I stepped back. "I need space," I said firmly. "Don't call me. Don't text me. If you really want to fix this, take a hard look at yourselves and figure out why you treated me the way you did. Until then, I'm done." Walking out of that house felt both freeing and devastating. I'd said everything I needed to say, but it didn't make the hurt disappear. If anything, it made it more real. As I drove home, I thought about the years I'd spent chasing their approval, hoping they'd finally see me as their equal. But now I understood something important. I couldn't force them to change. This time, I wasn't walking away out of anger. I was walking away to protect myself. And for the first time, I felt like I was finally taking control of my own story. It's hard to believe it's been a year since I cut my parents out of my life. Looking back, I don't regret my decision. For so long, I had let their favoritism, their lies, and their indifference weigh me down. Now, for the first time in years, I feel like I can finally breathe. The first few months after the fallout were rough. Therapy became my lifeline, a place where I could unpack years of hurt and anger without fear of judgment. My therapist helped me see how deeply my parents' treatment had shaped me, how it had made me question my worth, driven me to overachieve to prove myself, and left me with a constant fear of rejection. At first, it was hard to admit how much their actions had affected me. I'd spent so long pretending I was fine, telling myself it didn't bother me. But once I started talking about it, I realized how much I'd been holding in. Slowly but surely, therapy helped me let go of the pain and focus on building a life that wasn't defined by their approval. Reconnecting with old friends was another turning point. During the years I spent wrapped up in my family's drama, I'd let a lot of relationships fall by the wayside. I felt embarrassed about my situation and didn't want anyone to see how broken I felt inside. But after the confrontation with my parents, I realized how much I needed a support system. I reached out to a few close friends, people I'd lost touch with but still cared about deeply. To my surprise, they welcomed me back with open arms. One of those friends, Sarah, had been my closest confidant in high school. We met for coffee one afternoon, and within minutes, it was like no time had passed at all. She listened as I told her everything about the forgotten birthdays, the favoritism, the lies about Emma's tuition, and she didn't try to minimize my feelings or tell me to move on. She just listened. "That sounds awful," she said when I finished. "But I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. That takes guts." Hearing her say that meant more than I could put into words. For years, I'd felt like I was being overly sensitive or dramatic, but having someone validate my experience was like a weight lifting off my shoulders. Work was another area of my life that changed for the better. Not long after I cut off my parents, I landed a new job that was miles better than my old one. The pay was higher, the environment was healthier, and for the first time, I felt like my contributions were truly valued. One of the best parts of my new job was the sense of community. My coworkers were supportive and encouraging, and they genuinely celebrated each other's successes. It was a stark contrast to the constant competition and neglect I'd felt in my own family. One day, my boss pulled me aside after a team meeting. "You've been doing incredible work lately," she said. "I can tell you really care about what you do, and it shows. Keep it up." Her words caught me off guard. I wasn't used to being praised like that, especially not in a professional setting. It made me realize how much I'd internalized the idea that my efforts weren't good enough, even when they clearly were. As for my family, I haven't heard from my parents since the last conversation we had in their living room. At first, the silence stung. A small part of me had hoped they'd come to their senses, that they'd reach out with a genuine apology, or at least try to understand my perspective. But as time went on, I realized their silence was a blessing. It gave me the space I needed to heal, to focus on myself without the constant noise of their guilt trips and justifications. Emma and I have slowly started to rebuild our relationship. It hasn't been easy, there's a lot of hurt on both sides, but we're taking it one step at a time. She's made an effort to be more honest with me, and I've tried to let go of some of the resentment I'd been holding onto for so long. A few months ago, she sent me a text out of the blue. "I just wanted to say I'm proud of you. I know I've said it before, but I'm sorry for everything. I hope we can keep moving forward." It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was genuine, and that was enough for me. For the first time in my life, I feel free. Free from the expectations, the comparisons, and the constant feeling that I wasn't enough. I've learned to set boundaries and prioritize my own well-being, and I've discovered how much I'm capable of when I stop trying to please everyone else. There are still moments when I think about my parents and wonder what might have been if things had been different. But those moments don't consume me anymore. They're fleeting, like echoes from a past life that no longer defines me. Now, my focus is on building a future that feels authentic to who I am, a future where I'm surrounded by people who see me, value me, and love me for who I am, not for what I can do for them. And for the first time, I can honestly say, I'm happy.